Hello, everyone. I'm Caron Paxio, Media Past President of the Sacramento Valley CPC Society Chapter. As Alexis mentioned earlier today, we are beginning the first of the two of our breakout sessions. If you would like to join me, I will be in breakout session A, and we will be having a conversation addressing employee retention and the virtual workforce. My hosts will be Darren Bloomfield and Jeff Gibson. Dr. Russell, did you want to introduce your session?
Sure, Caron. I will be hosting Scott Carpenteri, who is president of K2 Parametric, a provider of parametric insurance, a product about which many people are unaware. And it's a unique experience for the insured and maybe a new product for you. Whether you go into presentation A or presentation B, I'm sure you'll be delighted.
So at the bottom of your screen, you should find a button that says breakout room, and you can select which breakout room you would like to participate. Thank you. Insurance is just like any other business or industry. Over the last several years, it's been forecasted that there will be a significant shortage of labor, with associated loss of substantial industry knowledge, due in large part to baby boomers retiring, which has not been completely offset by technology or by the influx of new people to the industry. I'm a regional claims manager with offices in Sacramento and Phoenix, and 30% of my staff can retire. That's a huge number. And so we are now hiring frantically, succession planning in anticipation of retirement. Also beginning last year, we heard about the Great Resignation, or really the Great Reassessment, as workers considered their career paths and their responsibilities during the pandemic. Gen Z also entered the workforce and more. So while this presentation is entitled Employee Retention in the Virtual Workforce, our speakers also hope to touch on broader employment issues facing insurers today. While there is a PowerPoint, this is a roundtable session, as we want to be interactive and to hear from all of you. I know that everybody has thoughts about employee retention and the virtual workforce. We would also like this to be more of a conversation, and we encourage you all to participate by using the chat feature. Joining us today are Darren Bloomfield and Jeff Gibson. Thank you, Darren, for already teeing up the bio. I am not going to read it to you, but I want you to see that our two speakers have very different perspectives. Darren as working for an insurer and a Gen Z, and Jeff being a recruiter with many years of experience in our industry. Darren, do you want to start up and take over from now?
Of course, thank you. To start off, I think it's important to give a little bit of background perspective of kind of where were you, when you encountered COVID. So I was a sophomore in college, so it was my second semester of my sophomore year. We went home for spring break, and we just didn't come back. So that was my first experience of being home for spring break, not having any idea of when I was going back, if I was going back finishing virtual, if I was still having my finals, if I was still having all my group projects. And then that kind of led into when my campus kind of shut down and we went back just to collect all our stuff from the dorms and then go home. That was also the summer that I had my first internship. So I was in Chicago. So it started as an in-person internship and then quickly morphed into a mostly virtual internship. So I think it's just kind of important to keep in mind how my generation, Gen Z, encountered COVID before we became full-time employees. And then going into my junior year of college, I was actually interning for a company based in Chicago when I was remote in Indianapolis. So this was all, before I graduated and started my first full-time job. So I think that really has formed the mindset of work is something you do, not necessarily a place you go. Kind of the pictures here is kind of the typical cubes in an office. And then this is my current work from home setup, where I've had a stand-up desk, customized some screens, different keyboard, different mouse. So I've definitely have invested some time and resources into putting together a work from home setup that I'm comfortable with. And I think that flexibility is definitely something that a lot of people have grown accustomed to. So I can give my perspective on this, and I'm sure Jeff can speak more towards what he's seen in the recruiting side and years past since since COVID has happened. So what I've kind of seen is some sort of, I'd say maybe like resentment or kind of change in ideals of my older generations, my mentors, or even like my parents of, hey, like, we went into the office. Why don't you have to go to the office? Kind of like what is the value of going into the office, being around your peers, kind of seeing how other people work. I work in underwriting, so I think it's especially helpful sometimes be discussing accounts in person and kind of hearing the behind the scenes that you wouldn't really see when things aren't answered on necessarily the emails of when you're picking up the phone and calling a broker and negotiating and going through different steps and gathering more information that some people wouldn't really want to put in an email. So I think kind of seeing that side of it is definitely helpful. And I think that's something that's still being kind of balanced. If Jeff can share anything from what he's seen with that.
Sure. It's it's a very interesting world that we live in. It's changed dramatically in the last 2 years. Having spent 20 plus years in this marketplace as a recruiter, you can kind of imagine we went from everybody working in the office, everything local, the interviews face to face. Can you imagine that? We had interviews face to face, and now companies are hiring from Zoom interviews. And if you would have asked me, is that possible or probable 2 years ago, I would have said, no way, that's not going to happen. We might do a phone interview. We might even do a video interview, but there's no way they're going to hire somebody based on a couple Zoom interviews. But that's no longer true. Obviously, it is happening. There's a huge mix between how companies are approaching this. Some are very open to the work from home scenario, and others are resistant to it. Some have come up with this great idea of the hybrid role, which if an individual is not interested in going into the office, the hybrid idea is not, in my mind, is not very effective, because people either are willing to go in or they're not willing to go in. If they are willing to go in, great. Hybrid is nice, couple of days at home, whatever might work. But there is a significant challenge, and of course, where this is all going to go in the next couple of years with the economic situation that we look like we're heading into, I don't really know. And with having no idea that this would happen, I can't even really completely forecast. But obviously, I'm of the baby boomer generation that has always gone into the office, even to this day. Running my own company, I'm in my office right now. And I should clarify that I'm in my physical office, not at home. I'm not opposed to people working from home. The challenge for us in helping candidates, which is what I do, help companies to find candidates. Our challenge is finding that balance and then being able to have the conversations necessary to help companies to staff. That's the big thing that we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, and I think Jeff brings up an interesting point of the hiring in a virtual environment as far as Zoom calls or even phone calls. I found my job and most of my interviews and job offers from LinkedIn. I had a pretty good network from college with several internships, fortunately enough to have. And I didn't I just had phone calls with my manager, and I didn't have like a virtual face-to-face until after I accepted the job, which I found kind of interesting. I reached back out to him and said, "Hey, like, can we have like a video call now, that we've accepted?" So I found that pretty interesting. And then also just for some perspective, the current job that I'm in, my first job out of college, I started virtually mostly. So our company, I don't think our office downtown in Chicago was officially open when I first started, and now we're kind of transitioning into a hybrid 1 or 2 days a week kind of role in the last month or so.
We're seeing more and more of that, where companies were 100% virtual during the height of the pandemic. And now they're trying to ease back into a hybrid kind of business model. We're seeing a lot of people change jobs because they do not want to go into the office at all. So they're open to remote. I don't know how many conversations a day with prospective candidates where it's remote only. That's all they're going to look at. That's all they're willing to do. It does make it difficult. It has advantages to a company that's open to remote only because they're not delegated to working. If you're a Chicago-based company, you don't have to find Chicago-only employees. Why not find somebody in Missouri or Indiana or somewhere else in the Midwest, or for that matter, why not find somebody in New York City if you're totally remote? So it does open up some candidate flow if a company is open to that. But I am seeing, just as Darren mentioned, I am seeing very much a trend towards let's do this hybrid thing. Let's work with candidates, but we want them in the office 3 days a week, and we'll let them work at home 2 days a week. We're seeing that transition very quickly to more of that type of standard.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's something I've kind of been thinking about as well. And, granted, I've only not even a year into my first full-time job, but just comparing my days of how is my day different when I go into the office and how is my day different when I'm working from home. Here's some kind of breakouts of, if I'm home, I kind of see going into the office as kind of extending my workday. And you could say that's not necessarily time you're directly being compensated for. You're also paying for the commute. I try not to go out for lunch downtown. It's $25 for food for a lunch downtown. So I try to bring in food. Sometimes, honestly, there's sometimes like some food anxiety of, am I going to have enough food at the office? And I'm like packing up food to bring to the office and just kind of like planning that out. I currently don't have a family at this time, but I could see a benefit of, wanting to stay home and kind of be with the kids, especially like I've seen my manager sometimes like want to, I'm going to go home and like catch the train because I have to go and pick up my kids from school. So I could see that would be an obvious benefit of already being at home. You wouldn't really have to worry about getting back home or getting somewhere else for your family. Going into the office, I think there's definitely benefits. From what I've seen today, I am in the office downtown, but today we're also having a lunch. We have a catered lunch today. We also have a couple people from New York in. Some of our head managers are coming in, someone from Florida. So we have some people that have came into Chicago that are not normally in Chicago. And then also after work, we have a large company happy hour with some of our broker clients. So a day like today, for me, is kind of like the business purpose. Like, yes, there's several reasons to be in the office. On Tuesday this week, when it was me and my manager and 2 or 3 other people in the whole building, that's maybe something I wouldn't necessarily agree with, but that's just kind of the give and take and weighing the scales as of now.
Yeah, that's all well said, Darren. It's really interesting because I think we're not really taking opposing views on this subject, but it may end up that way, right? But I think the biggest challenge that I see long term is communication and lack thereof, and then really, are people going to get tired of the same? I mean, you get up in the morning and you're there all day long. Some people don't even get up and get showered and get dressed, and so they're there all day long. You sneak down the hall to the kitchen to get a cup of coffee and sneak down the hall for lunch, so on and so forth. But my greatest concern for my clients and for the future of the industry, since we're focused on insurance, is the discipline necessary to continue to be effective and to get the work done. That's probably not a problem for Darren. He's very driven, self-disciplined guy, but not everybody is like Darren, of course. And so finding people who can stay focused is a big deal. And I can relate in a lot of ways, because the work that I do is very collaborative. We're a small office, but I work, and we have a bullpen environment. I'm in a private office right now, but I have a bullpen environment, and we're exceptionally collaborative. I like to know what's going on. I like to know what positions we're working on. I'd like to know what candidates are in the loop. And that's very difficult to do if I'm sitting at home and my other recruiter is here in the office, or she's at home working at her own desk. It's very difficult to be able to really have the collaboration, the synergy, and then, of course, as we've already said, and discipline in working at home comes in two extremes. Either a person is not very disciplined at all and they're easily distracted, by whatever means it is. And then, of course, I've worked with candidates who they don't know when to shut the computer off. They start at 6 o'clock in the morning and they're in their office till 9 o'clock at night. They don't know how to break away or to separate work, their work life from their home life. And so you have multiple challenges, and it really depends on the person. Some are going to be very good at it, and others, I think, are going to really be challenged. And I'll circle back around to that communication issue. No slam on any particular generation, but I mean, I've got children and grandchildren, and it's especially true with my grandkids. Their level of communication is to look up once in a while from their computer or from their handheld game and give you a kind of an honorable hello. So I'm greatly concerned about that in the long run, because I'm probably an extreme. I like to communicate. I like to work with people. I like to talk to people. I like to collaborate. So anyway, I'll leave that out there for other comments, of course.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's something that I've kind of seen of my manager and some other people trying to hire an interview for the Chicago office. If they're not necessarily based in Chicago, we've kind of seen I don't really think that they would hire necessarily a college grad that isn't, an hour or two outside of Chicago. I don't think we would hire someone, in Arizona to work for the Chicago office if they'd have less than 1 or 2 years of experience. And personally, I agree with that, as far as I think it's great to have the ability to have that touch point, especially when you're just starting out, and kind of knowing where your manager is, and that you'll meet them. Because I've heard some of my peers are they maybe have been working at their company for almost a year and they've never even met their manager in person, which I find that kind of strange and probably a little too much for me. I wouldn't really be interested in working for a company or someone for a whole year and not meeting anyone at that company in person. I think that's a little too much.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that's really a great point in regard to how far along somebody is in their career. I think that makes a big difference. It certainly can, because discipline is not something that we're typically born with. Discipline is something that we learn over time, and so I agree with that completely. I think that it's that the ability for someone to be able to get into that home office, if they are working from home, to be able to get into that home office, be able to familiarize themselves with their peers, and especially their managers, their leaders. And in addition to that, slightly maybe off the subject a little bit, is I hear, of course, because I'm on the phone every day with people, I hear, of course, the desire to want to be promoted, the desire to want to grow in an organization. I think a lot of that is going to be missed. And quite frankly, from a recruiter's advice, when I'm talking to a lot of candidates in terms of separating themselves from the pack, I tell them straight up, you want to separate yourself from the pack, you want to stand out from your peers, be willing to go into the office. That's not necessarily what everybody wants to hear, but really, truly, if the majority of your peers aren't interested in that, then find a job where you can go to the office at least three days a week and have that physical presence, so that they get to know who you are. Truly, the verbiage "out of sight, out of mind" it's a true statement. Out of sight, out of mind. Who's that lady or who's that guy? We don't know who they are. Apparently they do good work, but nobody knows who they are. So, if people want to get ahead, they're going to have to look at, what do I need to do to stand out? And I think, and this, of course, once again, 2 years ago, who would have thought this? But here's an opportunity for up and comers to really stand out amongst their peers. Go to the office, show up, let them see you. And so, yeah, it's Jeff. It's such a unique time in the world. It really is.
I was going to say something about that, Jeff, the unconscious bias by employees not being in the office and not having that visibility that others have.
100% correct.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
As somebody who coaches people, I'm looking for every advantage to help people when I'm talking to them to grow their career. And I'm going to give them that advice. Maybe it's wrong, but I don't think so. I don't think it's bad advice. I think it's good advice.
Do you have suggestions on how employees can improve their visibility if they're working in that hybrid environment, in addition to, as you mentioned, going into the office?
That's a great question. I think that any time someone can make an extra effort to, if nothing else, just reach out to their manager. You don't want to be a pest, and you don't want to call your manager 5 times a day just so they know you're there. But I do think it's a good idea, 2-3 times a week, just to connect with them, come up with a reasonable question, because let's face it, as leaders, we want to be wanted as well. And so if somebody calls and asks for my advice, and I coach people often, and if they ask for my advice, I'm excited to give that. So I believe that other managers, and I know, Karen, you're a leader in your company, so I have to believe that if you're in claims, right?
I am.
So if, as a claims professional, if you have adjusters reaching out to you for input and advice, you're not looking at them typically as, wow, what a pest. But I think you'd probably be glad to hear from them 2 or 3 times a week, knowing that not only are they out there because you can monitor them on a database system or an IT system, but that they're thinking, that they're engaged in what they're doing, and they're interested in your input. I think there's an advantage to that. I really do.
Darren, I would also think that as a newer employee to the company, that you'd want to have sat down with your manager, kind of set out a career path, and then have maybe some check-ins, right, with them to make sure that you're progressing the way that they expect you to, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think on that note, it's about maximizing the time that you are in person. So if you are going into the office or your employees are coming in, or your manager's going in, so then you go in. Something I was able to do is in the first few months, I would set up like a lunch with if I would set up a lunch with a client, the broker, and I would kind of talk to my manager like, hey, we're going out for lunch with Amwins today. Are you around? Do you want to come out? And then he would come in the office. So then I would see him and I would go out for lunch with a broker with him. So I think that kind of maximizes the purpose of, going into the office. Something too with the check-ins. Yeah, I did do a 6 months check-in in person. So maybe like 9 months in now. So a couple months ago. So we did do that 6 month check-in in person. And something I've found too is I think just developing rapport, with anyone on your team, essentially. How do you do that in a virtual environment? We use Microsoft Teams. You can use Teams versus when you use email kind of thing. I'd see like quicker responses. I ended up, using Teams for, or just or I would kind of email like a invitation. If I had a question, instead of just playing phone tag on Teams, I would send an invite, in an hour or so from now to my manager. Hey, can we hop on and talk about this account that, in 1 hour? And then he would either, accept it or postpone it later in the day. So I can usually get a hold of him in a couple hours, no bother. So I think having that direct line. But as Jeff said earlier, it's the responsibility and discipline that comes with time. And I think you might have some employees that are leaning out instead of, leaning into the communication. So I think that's where it becomes very difficult from a management perspective. Is your employee, I think, screening for people who are proactive in interviews before you hire them is kind of something that will become more and more apparent as we go on.
That's good. Hey, you always got to be, and it's evident that Darren is thinking, and you absolutely have to be thinking about those aspects of your career. I mean, I know you made that note on here that work is something you do, not a place you go. And certainly from a boomer's perspective, my perspective as a boomer, I don't necessarily, I mean, I agree, but I tend to correlate those two together, you go, because that's where the work is, that's where the discipline is. I call people, of course, at home because they're at home and the radio's blaring or the TV's on or the kids are screaming in the background. And I'm glad I don't hear that all the time, but that there's going to be a discipline problem when you have those kind of distractions. So, the whole focal point has to be on how can I not be distracted, and what can I do to make sure that people know who I am. And I think that's a good idea, going to lunch, inviting your boss to meet with you and a broker and all of those little things, thinking out of the box like that. I think is very wise, smart. So it's good and should do more of that. Absolutely. I wish everybody thought that way, Darren.
Yeah, and I think it kind of comes down to, from a manager perspective of, as your employee or your team, if they're not performing, then if you can kind of point to what Jeff says, is this employee distracted at home? And if you think so, if you think that's the reason why they're not being as productive, or if they're not producing as much as you think they could be producing, if they were in the office, and you can kind of help them or coach them if there was some sort of need for additional training, or if you can directly point, if you have your kind of reasons and you can point to, oh, this employee's working from home, I think it's a good idea for them to be in the office more. I think that's completely reasonable. I think working home to an extent could be seen as like a privilege, right? And if the employee isn't producing, then sure, ask them to come in the office more. But I think on the flip side of that too is like not micromanaging employees when they are home if they are producing.
Mhm. Right. You're right. It's a privilege. And I think that companies will, as the technology grows, to be able to monitor people. I do think that they will be monitoring people who haven't been proven yet. Maybe that will, after an individual's proven, they would ease up on that. But I think that technology will play a role. And I think companies will be looking at people. Are they disciplined? Can they get the job done? There could be patterns. Who knows? There's so much data that can be acquired through technology. Who knows? They might start looking at patterns. Joe is really good on Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, but Fridays and Mondays, he's just having a really hard time getting anything done, which you could kind of imagine that pattern, with opportunity for a long weekend or something. So it's definitely just a whole new world, and it's really untried for the most part, because I don't know what the percentages were prior, 2 years ago, people that worked from home, but I know in my work that it was certainly not the norm for people to work from home. Now I don't know what the percentage, maybe somebody knows those statistics. I don't.
And something I think is also pretty interesting to think about is, especially in insurance, and especially in insurance in the last 2 years during kind of COVID time, there's been a significant peak of job hopping I've seen large groups of 10, 15 underwriters all moving several times to different companies. Brokers are all moving around. There's an incredible amount of movement. And I think that to part is because the lack of loyalty to a company, to a manager, because if I never met anyone from this company and, really like I'm just working from home, what do I care if I have this carrier's name or this carrier's name, on my computer, if they're going to pay me more or give me more benefits or something like that, then what's really different if you don't have any ties to the organization as a whole. And I think that's something that could have been contributing to the recent movement.
That's true. That's a really good point. We're seeing so much movement. The one thing's for sure, the stigma that goes with moving too often. I mean, as as someone who's doing this business for a long time, if I see somebody has made a move earlier in 2022, I'm not going to call that person. I have no interest in helping that person make a second move in the same year. In fact, I don't really have a lot of interest in helping that person make another move in 2 years. They are affecting their career in a negative way by making those moves. And I have employers on a daily basis tell me, do not bring me job hoppers. They don't have to tell me that because I'm not going to, but they always are constantly, that's one of their number one complaints, sadly enough, maybe about other recruiters, but don't bring me job hoppers. And so employees, virtual or otherwise, that's a real issue. But I think you're right, Darren, when there's no face-to-face or very little face-to-face, it's just a paycheck. And we don't even get those physically anymore. They go right to the bank. So we don't care. We're only looking at, how much money is left after Uncle Sam takes his part and we pay for our insurance and so on. That's all we care about. There's really no name on the check anymore or anything. And so there's no identification. There's no, if I can use the word pride, there's no pride in who individuals work for. And in fact, I had a gentleman, Karen, I don't know if I told you this the other day, but I had a gentleman who asked me to help him find a second job.
Oh, you did. Yeah, you did. But go
Did I
ahead.
tell
Please
you
share
that?
that with everybody.
Yeah. Well, needless to say, that didn't happen. We were done with our conversation, but I also read an article right after that that showed that many people are working two jobs at the same time. They're double dipping, and because they're at home and they figure, hey, if nobody catches me, then I'll work two jobs. Right? So it's there's a lot of issues that will have to be dealt with over time, but we're still looking for the same things. We're still looking for stability. We're still looking for individuals that can communicate. These things are not going away, whether it's virtual communication or whether it's face to face. And people who are loyal don't have to be at a job for 15 years. We're not seeing much of that anymore, but to stick it out and to show that it's not just about the dollar, which a lot of it is, unfortunately. So anyway, interesting thought that you brought up there, Darren, in regard to the consistent changing that we're seeing out there. It's amazing.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Something I've also kind of noticed is how do you, again, back to like maximizing the time that an employee is in person, what's kind of like the business purpose for that. For example, like I'm going to this happy hour that I mentioned tonight. And I think like from, HR's perspective or kind of like event planning committee, like internally, I think like getting that invitation out, a few weeks, a month in advance, just to kind of plan. I mean, I've seen a lot of my brokers have, moved from Chicago to an hour, 2 hours away into the suburbs of Chicago. So for people like that, they don't really want to come in to Chicago necessarily. And especially they wouldn't come in unless there was, a couple weeks notice to kind of plan with that. So you have kind of clients that are not really coming downtown. Also, people internally might not really be coming downtown unless there's like an event, like a plan like this. I mean, a day like today is probably the most people I've seen in the office in the last few months, several months. So I think kind of balancing that culture element of, you're work from home, you're hybrid, some sort of virtual, but we as a company have a culture where we, make the initiative, put it on the effort to bring people in and build those relationships.
Yeah, that's good. Karen, you had mentioned in the introduction about the changes in the demographics of the industry. Baby boomers retiring. I'm 60 and I'm at the end of the baby boomers. And I only want to mention this briefly because you brought it up, but I think it's important to understand the opportunities in the industry are enormous. Boomers are leaving in droves, probably the next 10 years in the insurance industry. Hopefully, even despite what the economy might do, there's going to be a fairly high demand for insurance professionals, which is great for everybody in this meeting today. I think it's about a next 10-year period of time. Would you say you had 30 people eligible?
30%.
30%.
Yeah.
30% eligible. And that's actually a low number in some ways, but it's an astronomical number when you think about the turnaround. And it's both an opportunity for people like Darren, who is an up and comer, and obviously from my two dialogues with Darren, loves this business, is going to do very well. And so younger folks that are up and comers coming into the industry. But I also think it's a great opportunity for companies to recognize that some of the senior talent out there that for whatever reason, either displaced or retired and wants to work part-time opportunity, there's going to be a lot of good skill and a lot of good talent that companies will be able to latch onto, and even talent that maybe they need to make a move, but the next move is their last move, and a company can secure that individual. Maybe they're in my age bracket, maybe they're 60, they're going to be there until 67 or 68 when they're eligible for full Medicare, and they're not going to leave. And I think it's an overlooked aspect of the marketplace that's beginning to develop. And companies a lot of times will look at that and they'll say, well, we're building succession. Well, you're not going to build succession unfortunately on a lot of people who are earlier in the industry, because they're not going to stay. They're going to be there 18 months, 24 months, and they're going to move on. If companies will consider some of the more senior talent in the industry, they'll find that they're going to keep those people employed 5 to 7, 8, even 10 years, because the economy forces them to work. Let's face it, our 401ks aren't so pretty right now. And, so they're going to have to work, right? They're going to continue to be employed, and they're going to be loyal because A, that's their history, and B, they realize that as a more mature person, less companies will be interested in offering them opportunities. So there's some things there in the workforce issues that could be advantageous, both for the young folks up and coming and also those that have got some experience in the industry.
I have to share, I did hire 8 employees in the last 6 months. And one of the reasons a lot of these employees came on was because of the opportunity, sharing with them. I've got some people who are eligible and ready to retire, and I want to have this transfer of that institutional knowledge to them. And so that they can learn, grow, develop, and succeed in a career with our company. So it's been exciting to share that opportunity that we have. So
sure, no doubt. I think that the insurance industry is a great kept secret, and it's a shame that the industry as a whole hasn't done as good a job as they could in promoting what the opportunities are in the business, because they really are enormous. Whatever you want to do, it's a lifetime career, and you can change your role, maybe not even change companies, but you can change your role and do a multiplicity of things. 40-year period of your career, and always be in the same industry. It has so much to offer, and I wish that the industry would do a better job in selling the advantages, and it's going to be important to the up and comers, and I hope, once again, Darren, I keep referring to him because he's here, but he has found that out already in his early career, that it's a great industry to focus on. And I'd love to see more people get involved in it, even as they're going through their college years, because there are curriculum that they can take that will prepare them for this industry.
Right. We've got about 3 or 4 minutes. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask? Please put them in the chat. Oh, here's one. Oh, I think it's just a comment. It says, I'm 100% work from home employee. It can be done.
Sure.
Here's another person.
Absolutely. And I hope nobody thinks that by the back and forth that I would indicate that I don't agree with that. I think it can be done. It really depends on the person. Doesn't have to be my preference for somebody else to do well in it.
This is the beauty of the panel discussion, though, having a diverse set of thoughts and ideas and sharing those.
Sure.
Okay, here's another comment. Companies have to make an effort to evolve into virtual workforce, especially if you don't have an office to go to. Absolutely.
That's true.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we've kind of started to see now. I know my company right now, downtown Chicago, we have 2 floors in a downtown office building. I personally have only been on 1 floor, and I don't even think we're using 25% of the 1 floor that I've been to. I don't know if we're planning some sort of like downsizing of office space, but I've heard some companies do it. And then there's also like co-working spaces that I think some companies and offices might start like paying for passes to one of those so instead of having an office, they give their employee like a co-working space to go to. But I think that's a a massive line item of office space that companies might not necessarily need as much as they have had in the past.
Right. Here's a question. Can you share your opinions on training new employees and how to overcome them in this virtual world? What do you think is the future of commercial real estate?
You want me to take that one best I can? I mean, it's, obviously companies are committed in many cases, either through long-term leases or they own their buildings. I think as opportunities arise, I do think more and more companies are going to try to establish a hybrid scenario. But they also, because of I noticed somebody made a comment about in order to be competitive, and it's in order to be competitive, they are going to have to consider work from home as well, remote as well. So, what are companies supposed to do with millions of square feet that they own that they probably can't sell right now? The real estate industry is making an interesting turn, so they could be in trouble in that regard. So to leave all of that empty, if they can't sublease it, fix it, so they get a cheaper lease, or if they own their business and they can't sell it, they're going to be in trouble. So, yeah, I don't know. That's a great question.